Victory or death?
Hmm.
Those words just hang in the air, don't they? William Barrett Travis, February 24th, 1836. Chilling. But today, we're not just talking about the letter, we're going inside. Right into the cold, damp heart of that mission compound in San Antonio de Bexar. We're joining that small group of defenders as they head into the second week of what has become, well, arguably the most famous siege in North American history.
Welcome back. And yeah, you've got it set up perfectly. We're diving deep into the sources here, looking at what was really like inside the Alamo walls during those 13 days. Our mission today really is to get past the simplified folklore.
Yeah.
We want to analyze the choices, the incredible, difficult choices made day by day. We'll look at the tactics, sure, how the small force held out for so long, but also the psychological strain, the constant bombardment, and then that final brutal hour.
Exactly. This deep dive, it's about the ultimate test of courage, of human resolve. We're exploring how this, let's be honest, guaranteed military defeat somehow became this enduring symbol, this legend that really shifted the whole direction of the Texas Revolution.
Okay, so when we think of Santa Anna arriving, the picture is often chaos, right? A sudden shock. But the sources you've pulled together, they paint a different picture, more methodical.
That's a really important point. It wasn't quite a sudden shock. The Texians did have some warning, enough to gather some defenders, bring in some supplies, but, definitely not enough time to properly fortify a sprawling old mission like that. The Mexican advance, it actually started building up before the siege officially began. We see dragoon regiments, the Dolores Regiment, other battalions arriving near San Antonio around February 21st.
Okay, so those first few days, say the 21st to the 24th, it wasn't an immediate assault. It was more about positioning.
Yeah.
Like tightening a noose. Precisely. Santa Anna was using his numbers, his advantage, to establish siege lines, place his artillery. It was calculated. And crucially, like you said, no big head-on assault happened until that final day, March 6th. Those first 12 days were really a war of nerves. Constant bombardment, day and night, designed to wear them down physically and mentally, just the pressure of knowing you're surrounded by thousands.
Let's dig into that. The daily reality under fire, inside this place, never meant to be a fort with cannons hitting the walls. What did that actually feel like for the men inside? The toll?
Oh, it must have been brutal. Just imagine the noise, first off. Constant cannon fire. You've got 8-pounders, 12-pounders slamming into stone walls, dust, debris flying everywhere. And while those thick walls offered some protection from small arms, the sheer concussion, the vibration, plus sleep, forget about it. You need constant vigilance, repairs, manning posts, all while rationing food, water. It would grind you down fast.
Were the Texians able to effectively fire back? Could they disrupt the Mexicans setting up their positions?
They tried. They were resourceful, definitely. They had a decent number of cannons, maybe up to 21. But their effectiveness was really limited. The sources actually mentioned the Texian cannon had little to do in the final fight. Now, that wasn't for lack of trying. Early on, they did fire back, trying to scatter Mexican soldiers who were digging trenches or setting up batteries.
But the Alamo itself worked against them, the building's design.
Absolutely, that's key. Think about it. It's a mission, not a fortress built for modern warfare.
Mm-hmm.
The walls are high, but they don't have proper embrasures, those angled openings for cannons. And the height often meant the cannons couldn't angle down enough. So if the Mexican troops got too close, dug in right near the walls, the Texian guns literally couldn't hit them.
Okay, so the Mexicans learned that quickly, I imagine.
They did. They learned to avoid the limited range of the cannons when they were setting up.
Yeah.
They focused their artillery on weaker points in the walls. This basically left the defenders relying heavily on their rifles, those long rifles. Accurate, yes, deadly even, but not enough to stop an army indefinitely.
So the daily grind was less about big strategic moves and more about just holding on, trying to disrupt things, keep morale up, while hoping for relief that wasn't coming. As the days tick by February 25th, 26th, 27th, that hope must have been shrinking.
It must have been a crushing weight.
Mm-hmm.
Travis was sending out pleas like that famous victory or death letter. He was begging for hundreds, maybe thousands of men. But Texas was big, disorganized.
Yeah.
Those men just weren't materializing in time. But even amidst that fading hope, there was this one sort of incredible moment of reinforcement. Small, but significant.
You're talking about the men from Gonzales?
Yes, the Gonzales Ranging Company. On the night of March 1st, this small group, our sources consistently say 32 men managed to slip through the Mexican lines.
Wow, just 32.
32 men. And this wasn't about changing the military odds. It couldn't. It was an act of sheer solidarity. Gonzales was already deeply involved. Remember, the first shots were fired there. These men knew exactly what they were marching into.
They knew it was likely a death sentence, and they went anyway. That act, 32 men getting in, tells us something about the siege lines too, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows the Mexican investment wasn't, a perfect airtight seal. There were gaps, probably along the river, especially at night, that determined men could find. Their arrival gave a small but probably vital psychological boost, and it brought the number of defenders up to that final figure we often hear, somewhere around 188 or maybe 182 men.
Okay, let's pause on those numbers. 188 or 182, we see both cited. Why the slight difference?
It's a common point historians discuss, and it's good for listeners to understand. The variation usually comes down to how you count those Gonzales men, whether a couple of non-combatants ended up fighting. The exact tally of who came with Bowie versus Crockett initially, small discrepancies. But for our deep dive, the point is the scale under 200 men, confirmed fighters. And it's striking that, according to the records, none of the original garrison had actually fallen before those 32 Gonzales men arrived.
So you have the physical strain, the dwindling hope, and on top of that, there's a leadership issue developing inside, putting even more pressure on Travis.
Yeah, the burden on William Travis, who's only 26, by the way, was just immense. And it was amplified because James Bowie was essentially out of commission. The sources are very clear on this. Bowie was confined to a sickbed for pretty much the entire main siege period. What exactly he had is debated, maybe typhoid, some suggest tuberculosis, but the result was the same. The famous frontiersman, the co-commander, he couldn't actively lead.
What did that mean strategically, Bowie being sick?
Well, it took away a crucial figure. Bowie had a reputation, he knew the area, and he connected maybe better with some of the volunteers who weren't regular Army like Travis. So while Bowie still had this symbolic importance, maybe gave advice from his bed. Travis was the one making the active calls, day in, day out, rationing, defenses, sending out those desperate messages. That's an incredible weight for anyone, let alone a young officer in that situation. All right, let's move to the eve of the final battle, March 5th. This brings us to that iconic moment, maybe legendary, maybe literal, Travis drawing the line in the sand. Your analysis suggests this was really the final conscious decision point for everyone left inside.
That's exactly right. Whether he literally drew a line with his sword in the dust, it's debated, it's powerful historical drama, and it might well be true. But the real significance, historically, is that it marks the moment the choice became final. Solidified. They'd been holding out for nearly 2 weeks. They saw the Mexican numbers. They knew help wasn't coming, not in force anyway. The time for hoping, for debating was over.
It wasn't just about defending a building anymore. It was something bigger, a political act.
Precisely. Travis supposedly gave a speech. He offered anyone who wanted to try and escape the chance to leave, no dishonor attached. But he asked those willing to stay, to die for Texas, to cross that line. So the decision to stay, it became about the idea of independence. It transformed what was, militarily, a certain defeat into this incredibly powerful political statement. It was them living up to that victory or death promise, collectively.
And the sources emphasize the unity in that moment. Every single man making that conscious choice for sacrifice.
Yeah, the accounts really highlight that. Even Jim Bowie, sick in his cot, unable to stand. The story goes he asked his friends to carry his cot over the line.
Wow.
Yeah, think about that gesture. The co-commander, physically broken, but still signaling his absolute commitment. That must have cemented the resolve for everyone else there. Even in his final hours, he chose allegiance.
So, looking at it strategically, even knowing they faced annihilation, what did this final unified choice achieve for the revolution itself? It achieved immortality, essentially. Think about it. If they'd surrendered or tried a mass escape and got cut down, the story would be one of failure, maybe demoralization across Texas.
But by choosing, together, consciously, to fight to the last man, they created martyrs. And martyrs, historically speaking, are often far more powerful for a cause than, say, a tactical retreat. By that evening, March 5th, those 180-something men knew their fate. They were ready. They chose legend.
The long wait is over. Now we hit March 6th, pre-dawn. Dark, probably cold, and then the silence breaks. What was the signal Santa Anna used to start the final attack?
It was a sound deliberately chosen for its terrifying message. The Mexican Army buglers played the El Deguello.
El Deguello, yeah. Roughly translated, it means the slit throat or the cutthroat song. But its military meaning was unmistakable. No quarter. No surrender would be accepted. No prisoners taken. Every defender was marked for death. That's chilling. It underscores this wasn't just storming a fort. It was planned as an extermination, ordered from the very top.
Absolutely. This wasn't a chaotic rush. It was a planned military operation. The sources confirm the final orders were detailed, full and precise, signed by Brigadier General Amador, under Santa Anna's command, of course. The plan: 4 columns attacking different points of the wall simultaneously. Time for just before dawn, that moment of deepest exhaustion for defenders, poor visibility, but just enough light for attackers to see their way.
4 columns at once, thousands of troops against fewer than 200. That must have just overwhelmed the defenses almost immediately.
Well, the initial clash was incredibly fierce, but ultimately, yeah, short-lived. The Texians fought back desperately, pouring rifle fire down, using what working cannons they had left. The sources do say they managed to push back the very first wave in places, brief repulses. That disciplined rifle fire, especially from guys like Crockett's Tennesseans, inflicted real casualties initially.
Was any particular spot more effective in that first defense?
Yes. The accounts mention the cannon on the roof of the chapel. Remember, the chapel was probably the sturdiest part of the complex. That cannon apparently did more execution than any other before its crew was inevitably killed. But any Texian success was temporary, just the sheer weight of numbers. It was relentless. One wave falls, another takes its place. The walls were going to be breached.
And once they were over the walls, the whole fight changes instantly, right? It goes from defending a perimeter to just brutal, close-in fighting inside the compound.
That transition is key to understanding why it ended relatively quickly. Yeah. As the Mexican soldiers poured over the walls, the north wall seems to have been the main breach point, but they got in elsewhere too, the cattle pen area. The defenders were pushed back into the main plaza, then forced into the buildings, like the long barracks. So it goes from a siege defense to these desperate, chaotic, room-to-room fights, hand-to-hand combat, and that no-quarter order. It was being carried out efficiently. It meant the actual fighting, once the walls fell, probably only lasted maybe an hour, maybe 90 minutes max.
Room-to-room fighting, that sounds like any organized defense just completely dissolves at that point.
It implies it couldn't hold. The Alamo's layout, separate rooms, barracks not really connected for defense. It wasn't designed for a layered fallback. Once the outer walls failed, it became fragmented. Small groups, barricading doors, fighting until they were out of ammo or just overrun. It wasn't a coordinated retreat. It was a series of final stands happening almost simultaneously across the compound. The speed of the Mexican advance inside just didn't allow for reorganization, only reaction. So now we have to look at those final moments. The leaders. Travis, Crockett, Bowie. The sources give us glimpses, details of how these figures we've talked about met their end, fulfilling that pledge they'd made. Yet the end was defined by that brutality, that no-quarter order. They essentially died where they stood, defending their assigned posts. It confirms that narrative of total sacrifice. No surrender, no retreat.
Let's start with Travis, the commander. Where did he fall?
Travis was found dead on the north wall, and that location is significant. The north wall was the longest, most vulnerable section, and likely the first place breached. So he died right there, at the most critical point, defending his post, just as you'd expect. His death early in the assault really symbolized the collapse of that outer defense, leading to the chaos inside.
Okay. Then David Crockett. His death. This is maybe the most debated, most mythologized part of the whole Alamo story, isn't it? So many conflicting stories. What do the sources, the primary accounts, actually suggest?
Right. This is where you really have to sift through things. The popular image, Crockett swinging his rifle like a club, surrounded by fallen enemies, that's mostly folklore. The actual sources give us a couple of main possibilities, both pointing to fierce resistance. One strong account, supported by survivors like Susanna Dickinson, puts Crockett and his Tennesseans making a final stand inside one of the rooms in the low barrack near the main gate, fighting desperately in close quarters.
Okay, so that's the fighting to the last breath version. But then there's the other account, mostly from Mexican sources.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Several accounts from Mexican officers, like Colonel Almonte, and some later documents suggest that Crockett and maybe 5 or 6 others were captured alive after the main fighting had stopped. And according to these accounts, Santa Anna ordered their immediate execution, usually by bayonet, to enforce the no-quarter rule to the absolute letter. Historians today tend to lean towards this latter version, capture followed by immediate execution. But, whether he died fighting in the room or was executed seconds later, the core image remains. He was resisting until the very last possible moment within that compound. The bravery isn't really in question, just the exact manner of death.
And that ambiguity itself highlights the totality of Santa Anna's order, right?
Wow.
Fallen in combat, executed moments later, the outcome was the same. No mercy. It speaks volumes about Santa Anna's intention. Absolute destruction of the garrison. Which brings us to James Bowie, the man who couldn't even stand. How did the famous knife fighter meet his end? Confined to that cot. Bowie died right where he'd been throughout the siege, in his sickbed, likely in a room in the long barracks. Even though he was incapacitated, reports say Mexican soldiers entering his room found him ready.
He supposedly fired pistols he kept near him, maybe even used his famous knife, before being overwhelmed and killed in his bed. It's a grim picture. Even a dying man had to be violently dispatched under the no-quarter rule. His end, unable to stand, but still fighting back. It's maybe the ultimate symbol of that doomed garrison's tenacity.
So the sheer numbers ensure the Mexican victory, obviously, but it's that El Degüello order, the calculated ruthlessness, that makes it such a swift, complete annihilation.
It was fast, devastatingly effective, and total. Within, say, 90 minutes of that first bugle call, it was over. All the fighting men, that number 182, 180, whatever the precise count, were dead. Santa Anna achieved his objective, ruthlessly. But as we'll see, the cost, even for him, was higher than just the casualties his own army took. #tag conclusion. So the military outcome for the Texians? Absolute destruction. Just as Travis had promised victory or death, they got death. But looking at the cost to Santa Anna, that's where we start to see the seeds of his own eventual failure, maybe. Indeed. While the exact number of Mexican casualties is really hard to pin down, you see estimates from as low as 60 killed and wounded to as high as 600 or more. Even the lower numbers are significant. Think about it. Needing thousands of soldiers and suffering potentially hundreds of casualties just to defeat fewer than 200 men holed up in a mission. It showed the kind of fight Santa Anna was up against. This wasn't going to be an easy suppression. It wasn't a cheap victory by any measure.
And while all the fighters were killed, Santa Anna did deliberately spare a few non-combatants.
Yes, that's an important part of the immediate aftermath. A small group of survivors, mostly women, children, and at least one enslaved person, Joe, Travis's slave, were spared. Susanna Dickinson, the wife of Artillery Captain Elmeron Dickinson, is probably the most famous. And the sources suggest they were allowed to leave specifically to tell the tale. It was part of Santa Anna's strategy. Spread fear, show the cost of resistance, encourage others to give up.
And then came that final act, the one that arguably backfired the most, ordering the bodies burned.
That order, probably his biggest strategic blunder relating to the Alamo. He commanded his troops to gather all the Texian bodies, stack them up, and burn them in funeral pyres. It was meant as the ultimate insult, desecration, to deny them proper burial, erase their memory, serve as this terrifying final warning, extinguish the rebellion through fear.
But it did the exact opposite, didn't it? Those flames didn't erase anything. They kind of cauterized the memory, made it permanent.
Absolutely. The Alamo fell. Santa Anna thought he'd crush the heart of the rebellion right there. But those 13 days, culminating in that final assault and the burning of the bodies, it lit a fire across Texas. The news spread incredibly fast. And while the specific phrase, "Remember the Alamo," might not have been shouted on March 7th, the sentiment was immediate. The sacrifice became this powerful, unifying symbol. It took what had been a somewhat fragmented revolution and gave it this iron core, this determination for vengeance.
It gave the movement its martyrs. Militarily, holding the Alamo that long might have been questionable strategy. Politically, though, that sacrifice of 180-odd men, it became everything.
And that burning sense of resolve, that need for revenge, would become crucial very, very quickly. Because even as the smoke was clearing over the Alamo, another tragedy was unfolding elsewhere in Texas, one that would pour even more fuel on that fire.
Which brings us right to our next deep dive. We need to look at Colonel Fannin, his command at Goliad, and how Santa Anna's no-quarter policy, brutally tested and proven effective at the Alamo, would be applied again with devastating consequences. The Goliad Massacre. But for now, just think about that paradox. Santa Anna used overwhelming force and utter ruthlessness, hoping to terrify the Texians into submission. But by forcing those men at the Alamo into a choice between surrender and certain death, he accidentally handed the revolution the very thing it needed most, an unforgettable symbol of sacrifice. An unbreakable moral center. How often does that happen? Where calculated brutality backfires so spectacularly. The Alamo's fall, in a strange way, guaranteed Santa Anna's ultimate defeat.